am the humongous, the Lord Humongous, the warrior of the wasteland, the Ayatollah of rock and roller!
Inside this room, all of my dreams become realities, and some of my realities become dreams.
What in the wide, wide world of sports is going on here? Alive! It's alive! It's alive!
You are listening to The Wilder Ride, getting wilder by the minute. Here are your hosts, Alan Sanders and Walt Murray.
And welcome back to The Wilder Ride, getting wilder by the minute, a podcast where we break down and celebrate the films of Gene Wilder 1 minute at a time. And we are in the midst of season 1, and we are reanimating Young Frankenstein. I'm Alan Sanders, I'm your host.
And I'm Walt Murray, your co-host.
And although we've traveled back in time where it's a little archaic and not quite apocalyptic, we are pleased to have with us some folks who understand what it is to be in a post-apocalyptic world. We have Rick and Julia from the Mad Max Minute. Welcome, guys.
Hello, Alan and Walt. Thank you for having us along.
Yeah, we are really happy to be here.
I always start off with our first minute of a guest that's first time on this particular podcast, asking about when did you first fall in love with or watch or whatever your thoughts are on Young Frankenstein, and where does it fit in the overall body of comedies that you've seen in your lifetime?
I think, for me, Gene Wilder's work is one of those loves that has just always been there. I grew up watching Young Frankenstein and Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, stuff like that, and it just part of my childhood.
Rick, what about you?
Me, on the other hand, I grew up with Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. That was the first one that my parents deemed appropriate to expose me to, and it wasn't until I was in high school. A buddy of mine, I feel like most of my movie taste and watching experience comes from one particular friend that I'd go over to his house and hang out there all the time. And we would watch movies like Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein. And he was the one that exposed me to all of this. So I came to it a bit later in childhood, but I always bemoan the fact that I didn't get to watch them sooner.
So you were like, your parents were probably the ones going, oh, so it was that friend of yours that exposed you to all those things.
Correct. My parents were the kind that when I had a bunch of my friends over for my birthday and they said, you know what, it's your birthday, we'll take everybody to Blockbuster and we'll pick out a video. And one friend of mine, a different one, he picked out Spaceballs and we brought it home and we put it in the machine. And when the princess said something about, what was it? She gets her hair shot. She's like, you son of a or something like that. My mother, you know how mothers do that thing where they're in the other room and then their spider sense starts tingling and they hop into that room almost instantaneously. Oh, my friend was convinced that my parents literally hated him from that day forward because my mother didn't know what to do with that situation.
That's funny. I always said my dad had some kind of radar that if we rented a movie that had, it could be a 90-minute or 120-minute madcap action sci-fi, doesn't matter. But if there was one frickin' love scene, that's when he walked in and goes, "What are you guys in here watching?" Like, yeah, Dad, we always rent porn when you're at home. Of course, Dad. What do you think it is?
You see, that's why when I went over to yet a third friend's house in 4th, 5th grade, and we watched Terminator on VHS. We did not do that at my own house. We did it at his.
Yeah. One scene. And my dad would be the one to walk in. I wouldn't be surprised if that'd be the scene in that movie.
My dad was a Vietnam.
You don't understand. Kyle Reese won't be born if this... No. John Connor won't be born if this scene doesn't happen.
Mom, it's essential to the plot.
Right, it's just biology.
Yeah.
Well, see, my dad was a Vietnam vet, and he was in law enforcement, so he'd walk in and be like, that isn't what a dead body really looks like.
You get the opposite.
All right, Dad.
You would get the opposite. Yeah, no, isn't it strange, and I know we've kind of not even started to talk about Young Frankenstein, but isn't it strange that, natural things that, happen between people is taboo, but watching people get blown up and chased and stomped by robots, so that's okay.
That's fine.
Well, let's get into minute here 51, where closing in on the halfway point. We're going to get to it this week. Appropriately, we'll hit the halfway point on Hump Day this week, on Wednesday. But right now, we're in minute number 51. And when we last left off, we were in an angry town hall / HOA meeting. The town hall, and the homeowner is not really keen on the new member of the neighborhood that might be up to the family traits of bringing the dead back to life. And they decide to cut over to Inspector Kemp. And we will end this minute with Inspector Kemp saying that he has to pay a little, and we won't know what. But in the meantime, let's get to this conversation taking place in this town hall meeting. Walt, we get introduced to Inspector Kemp. We met him last Friday, and he owns this entire minute. Kenneth Mars playing Inspector Kemp.
Yeah, which is just a brilliant character. And I laughed through this whole thing coming from a law enforcement family, and thinking, this is the guy that they want to hear from. This is the authority. This apparently is the law enforcement agent of the city. You can hardly understand what he's saying. He looks absolutely amazing. And then he's just, just tears the scene to pieces with his overacting, and he's just a brilliant, brilliant character.
Rick, let me ask you, how many times, and you may have to think back to when you first saw it, but especially going back and rewatching these minutes for today, how many times did you have to really focus on the dialogue that he was delivering with the kind of accent he chose for this character?
Not as many times as you might imagine. This is probably one of the easier to understand accents that I've seen in film. I think the main accent that we have problems with are those more thick Irish ones. German, on the other hand, I think it's a bit more natural to my bloodline, maybe. I don't know. I come from, a Northern European lineage, so it makes sense there. But I love the gag as he's speaking here, that he has those sharp T's that would probably blow out any sensible microphone. But then when he gets to the end and no one's understanding him, it's one of those things where they have to toe that line between completely illegible, not even illegible, not understandable, and completely accessible. And it's great.
And it's obvious, and we're skipping around a little bit. We're going to definitely talk this through. We've got plenty of time for this minute. It's funny, even he has to then change his own accent to make sure people understand what he's saying. It's like he must know, because when he decides to explain what he means or explain what he just said, he becomes much more intelligible.
Well, I'm still not sure what his first line was in this minute. So I had to listen to it 3 or 4 times. I'm like, you got me. This is, I understand just about everything else, but I still have no idea what he opens with.
Well, it's the exact phrase is a riot is an ugly thing.
Okay.
A riot. I shouldn't probably do it like him. We already have it on the movie. Yeah, the opening line is a riot is an ugly thing.
Okay.
Actually, let's start with this opening monologue, because I want to digest this for a minute, because when you first think of riots, and I mean, we've got our Mad Max friends here, so they may think of riots in a different way. But he says, a riot is an ugly thing, and once you get it started, there's little chance of stopping it short of bloodshed. Then he says, before we go running about killing people, we'd better make damn sure, and there's going to be a change from the script to what he does, but damn sure of our facts is what the script says. But let me ask you this. The last time that you staged or saw a riot, was the goal of the riot to kill as many people as possible?
Now, we might be arguing semantics here, but I'm pretty sure if your goal is to kill one specific person, that's not a riot, that's a lynching.
Well, there you go. They're already using an inaccurate term.
Yeah. I mean, we're, like you said, we're not unfamiliar with the concept of riots. I mean, you wouldn't have Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior, without a starting montage of riots literally all over the world. But those were, food riots and water riots and people trying to get resources. This is, a neighborhood upset because of what their neighbor may or may not be doing. And I love that Kemp is keeping a level head about this. More or less.
Ish, yeah.
Yeah, in this scene, he's presenting himself as the good guy, saying, no, let's not go out and just mindlessly kill people. Let's get the facts before we go out and mindlessly kill people. So at least for this minute, he's right. This monologue brings to mind the scene from Beauty and the Beast, where the townspeople are getting all riled up by Gaston and the beast in the mirror.
Not safe till his head is mounted on my wall. I say we kill the beast.
And they go stomping off to the castle to kill him. It's exactly what they want to happen here. It's not a riot, it's a lynch mob.
Yeah, and it is almost, we're going to kill somebody, but we just need to get our facts straight before we do it.
I love how he presumes that already. He's like, before we go around with all of this, killing of people and only bloodshed apparently is what brings a riot to an end, which I didn't know that either. I don't have the riot handbook. I haven't gone to Rioting 101, but I didn't realize that riots escalated to the point that it wasn't. What do you call it then? If the people aren't being killed, is it not a riot? Is it
kind
just a gentle
sacrifice?
skirmish?
Disturbance.
A disturbance.
Yeah. It's funny you should mention the idea of a riot handbook, because I tried to do some research to see if there was some sort of sociological study done about riots. And a lot of what I was finding was that due to the wild and unrestrained nature of, well, not only the riot itself, but why riots happen in the first place, they're nebulous. Like, there's no common lead up, there's no common goal, there's no common outcome for a riot. It's one of those things where, yeah, it's an ugly thing. And
yeah, and it's almost like an irrational, basically the whole psyche of the group is completely irrational.
Yeah. I imagine that Kemp is probably running around with the embellishments that he has because of a prior riot.
Yeah, I was kind of wondering about that because, the town elders had said in the previous minute that this has happened 5 times before. So I kind of speculated on how Kemp got to where he is, with his missing eye and his wooden arm and everything else. So he probably knows riots pretty well.
Now, if you remember, we did talk about that when Gene Wilder and Mel Brooks sort of got together to put the script together. They didn't just pull from the original Frankenstein. They did all of the Universal monster pictures because there's pieces from Bride of Frankenstein in here. There's pieces from Son of Frankenstein and Ghost of Frankenstein. And I believe it was in Son of Frankenstein where there was a, quote, inspector who ran into the creature and had his arm torn off. And so this is sort of that character to kind of harken back to, hey, maybe at one point in time he did come face to face with the creature. But I got to ask, they use the term riot, and you guys have already pointed out, it's not a riot they want. It's a lynch mob. It's a mob they want. They want to go pitchforks and torches to go after a specific victim. So I'm wondering if they're meaning the term riot like, how we think of something that's really uproariously funny. Oh, look at that's a riot.
It's a riot.
And we're just misinterpreting it.
Well, that would not be the first time that's happened in this movie.
I mean, it is a comedy.
It is a comedy,
right?
Yes.
And this guy is a riot.
Well, in this town, in the whole Frankenstein genre is why we know what riots and lynch mobs are. Those are people running through the town with pitchforks and torches trying to kill the crazy doctor or the monster.
Or both.
Or both.
In this monologue here coming up, this is where we actually get the title when he mentions Young Frankenstein. So obviously they know about credits. The entire line, but that's where we get the actual title. Young Frankenstein is this monologue here from Inspector Kemp.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that's the only place in the movie that it's used, as far as I know.
Yeah, this is the only place. It was when he goes, pay young Frankenstein a visit. I want to go back to the lines here that he added because it is different than the script. The script was, we better be damn sure of our facts. And he changed it to, damn sure he is following in his grandfather's footsteps. And of course, the town can't understand what he's saying. He's like, footsteps. And he starts doing the little dance. So let me ask you this, because Rick, I know you mentioned before we even went to the start of this, when we were all sort of recapping this minute. We've got a monocled inspector who has his monocle over his patched eye.
Mm-hmm.
When you first saw that, what did you think of that character?
I think when you see someone wearing an eye patch and then they have a monocle over that eye patch, I think the first question is, first, why?
Exactly.
Yeah.
What purpose is that serving? And I love it when he says, damn sure, because he lurches his head forward, flings the monocle off his face, and then places it back over the eye patch. It's ridiculous.
That makes me think that the eye patch is fake. And he's putting the the eyeglass there out of habit, or maybe the eye patch is new. We'll give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe the eye patch is new, and the muscle memory is telling him to keep putting the monocle over that eye.
Well, you've heard pirates and the way they use eye patches. They don't always use eye patches to cover a lost eye. Sometimes you leave the eye patch over a well eye, and as you're going from the deck of a pirate ship down into the hold, you move your eye patch over to your other eye, and you have an eye that's already adjusted to the darkness.
Yes. So
maybe Inspector Kemp was a sailor in his past life, and so he's gotten used to holding a, eye patch over his eye, and it just so happens that eye is, I don't know, nearsighted, maybe? I don't know. It could be his reading eye, his low-light reading eye.
Oh, I like it. Because I understand that whole concept. In fact, that's still true to this day in the military. If you're on watch and you need to go from a really bright spot to a really dark spot, that you will usually cover or try to keep one eye closed, so that way it's more used to the dark, so you can immediately go from a bright location to a dark location. I hadn't even thought about that. Look at Inspector Kemp. He's much more profound in law enforcement than I even gave him credit.
Yeah, I think I really underthought this one. I was trying to think, if I was watching this for the first time and I saw Inspector Kemp, what my reaction would be. And I think my reaction would be, what the hell is this guy? It's like he's completely outlandish and perfect in a weird way for this movie, because he's almost more of all the other Mel movies. He would have fit in just about anything else. And he is probably the strangest, most unique character in this movie. And he almost goes too far at points, but he doesn't. And he stays within the framework of this movie.
Well, he's able to keep the character in, it's very loose, but the box that he's got himself, I think you're right. This is the most outlandish. I think it's more outlandish than Igor.
Oh, I think so.
Once again, Igor, though, also serves the purpose of his character. He's not so stupid that you're just like, okay, that doesn't even belong here. I buy that he belongs here. But you're right. I think as far as this is as close to the edge where it becomes too much Mel Brooks and not enough Gene Wilder.
Well, and when you see the 31 movie, Igor is almost like, he's believable. He's almost like the kind of looser version.
Well, don't forget, he was Fritz in 1931.
Yeah, that's true.
Igor didn't show up till the third movie.
The third one, the son of...
Igor. We keep calling him Igor because we're used to calling him Igor in this, but Igor.
I just respect what he's asked us to call him.
Yes. Out of respect, we call him Igor.
But, but this character is so interesting because he is kind of and we see this as we go through these minutes, just kind of a crazy, outrageous guy. But
the whole town seems to look up to him.
Oh, they do. Like they're mesmerized by him. The entire room is looking at him through his entire monologue.
What does this have to say that he represents logic and reason in this town?
and the upholding of the law.
Right. This is your chief law enforcement officer.
Which, taking him at face value, seems ridiculous because he's got this flair about him and this over-the-top accent. But actually what he's saying makes sense. He's trying to keep the townspeople at least a little bit under control. So at the core, I think he is a good inspector for right now. In this minute.
Yeah, I agree. And I was kind of thinking through some of the other law enforcement type people from movies that I enjoyed growing up. And I was thinking of like Jackie Gleason and Smokey and the Bandit and some of those. He's also a good, respected law enforcement officer, but kind of an outrageous character. Over the top, loud, brash, which I guess really describes some of the people I know in law enforcement.
Well, this is actually a good point you're bringing up about the police, the law and order, military. Being ex-military myself, it bothers me when there's those people that are still in military mode all the time.
Right.
Like they feel like my job is to bark orders and to snap attention and to be crisp about everything. It's like, dude, you're not in the military anymore. You're out. Right. Okay. Ease off, And I think maybe that's his lifestyle. He's gone overboard. It's gone way over the traditions of military and decorum. Look how he walks. It's almost like he's goose-stepping when he walks. It's very rigid, very forced. It's all, even his arm movement last minute when he wanted to light his cigarette. It's almost as if you're watching one of those weapon color guards where they snap the rifles and they do the rifle spins and motions. It's very, very militaristic. I think it's just taken it to, almost the ludicrous degree. They've gone ludicrous speed.
Yes, they have. Well, I even went and looked at Transylvania police uniforms, and I could not find anything similar to what he had. Everything, of course, today it's a little bit more militaristic than it is here, but it's still very professional, and it always has been kind of a professional uniform. But this would have been the dress of dress uniforms for somebody in law enforcement.
Yeah, this is not how you go walk the beat at night. This is your dress blues when you go to a specific event. But again, I've known people who, any chance they get, they're wearing something like that in public. They want to look like, oh, look at me. So I do want to pull back, though, from maybe how good this inspector might be, because when his monocle comes off and he realizes, I've got to put my monocle back, and like any good eyeglass wearer, when your eyeglasses are off, or in this case your monocle, you want to take the chance to, get any smudges off of it. Why does he rake it across his buttons?
Oh, that is cringe-inducing. Absolutely cringe-inducing. It makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up every time I hear it.
I mean, at this time of I don't know, eyeglass and eyewear development, do they have scratch-proof lenses?
Not at that time. I had glasses up probably until maybe almost the 80s, because I remember breaking several pairs, scratching them all up.
So this makes me think that it may be the muscle memory thing, and he really does have an eye that's put out, but he just puts the monocle in place because it makes him look important.
Yeah, well, and I think there's also...
Because it certainly isn't going to be able... You're not going to be able to look through a lens that if that's how he polishes it.
Oh, gosh, no. It's going to be all scratched to pieces. And yeah, and sometimes when I used to wear glasses before with contacts, just sometimes I would take them off and clean them as I was kind of thinking, as part of a thinking process. And I think that's a little bit of maybe what's going on here, too, is he's just composing his thoughts. But, and it is, obviously, I think it's a lot of habit, too. But he is just outrageous.
When he puts the monocle back on here in this minute, and he's walking slowly toward camera, really commanding the presence of the room, and he ends on that line about following in his grandfather's footsteps. Did you notice his one good eye goes through some like mad twitch session for a good, 2 or 3 seconds? I mean, he's a mad hatter at this point. I mean, he's like,
yeah, he is.
My eye is just
nuts.
Twitching crazily. I think maybe the inspector... he's suffering from a little PTSD.
Yeah, I think he's got some irreparable damage.
He blinks at least 5 or 6 times before the group says, what? And he's like, footsteps, grandfather's footsteps. When he's taken out of character, though, for that moment, because he can bring his voice down, he brings the formality down, to make sure we can hear him. Notice that as soon as he's corrected or address the question of what he said, the camera comes to the other end of the room and he snaps back to attention. He's back to his very slow, very formal delivery. So again, I think this guy has constant that military regiment in mind nonstop. Okay, well, I didn't realize that was going to be the last profound thing that was going to be said.
We're always just shocked.
We'll see you tomorrow.
When you say something that smart, it's just shocking.
Sorry. Wow.
Yeah.
I'm rewatching the minute. And I'm noticing, is his facial hair different on either side?
Hold on.
I hope so.
It looks like one side is bushier or more filled in than the other side.
Let me look here, because he's getting ready to lean down.
You know what? I think you're right.
I don't know. It
might be a result of war wound. He's got scars that no longer grow facial hair, something like that.
Or shaving with one eye.
Shaving with one eye, I think, is probably going to be the goal.
Yeah, that might do it.
Oh, I'm going to go with that one. It doesn't look horribly uneven, but yeah, it is a little off. It feels like the left side dips a little further down before going down to the mutton chop on the side.
I like the idea that he's trying to groom himself with one eye. And maybe the one eye situation is new and he hasn't...
Well, don't forget, he's also only got one arm.
Adjusted.
Yeah, that's true.
He's trying to present this incredibly put together appearance, and he's not quite making it.
All right. Well, when it comes to madcap characters or crazy characters or figures of authority or leadership, you guys have some sense of some crazy leaders of gangs, maybe biker gangs or road, wasteland car gangs. Is there anybody in the Mad Max universe that you would equate the Inspector with?
Oh, that's a good question.
Well, there's several I can think of off the top of my head. The first one that I can think of from the first movie is probably a very small character named Labatouche.
Yes!
So, very early on in the first Mad Max movie, it's established that Max, being a young father, is growing more or less out of his love with law enforcement because he wants to spend more time at home and not spend 3 days out on the road. So, his boss, Captain Fifi McAfee, uses Main Force Patrol funds to build a V8 Interceptor for Max to drive around. And Labatouche is the commissioner holding the purse strings for the Main Force Patrol. And he is just a bookworm, more or less. But when he shows up on screen, he's wearing full kendo gear, as if he's either going to fight a street gang or go to a class or something like that. And when I think of government officials dressed up to the nines, he was the first one I thought of. He's good. He's not over the top like Kemp, but he's more put upon and
right.
just weirdly dressed.
I remember the scene you're talking about. That's the scene, like you said, I think he starts off in the scene, he's sitting down and Fifi's really happy. He thinks they've got Max for a little bit longer. And he's like, you will not try this on me again. I do not enjoy wasting money. Goodbye and good luck.
And then he goes down the stairs and he's never seen or heard from again.
Very formal. Now, where would you fit elements of Toe Cutter, though, into this? I mean, because Toe Cutter has a bit of craziness to him, and yet his entire gang, I mean, when he starts talking, his every word, they are not going to interrupt him.
Toe Cutter certainly does have a way of speaking, and listening to him talk was one of my favorite parts of watching the original Mad Max. I think they definitely have that in common.
It seems like, yeah, as crazy as Toe Cutter may kind of act, obviously not to the point of Inspector Kemp, he has that sort of, he owns his audience and they are not going to interrupt him. And I just think that Toe Cutter, he's got that crazy side of him, but he's also a ruthless gang leader and he knows how to command his audience.
He's got that mania about him. Another character that comes to mind from the second movie would have to be the Toady, played by Max Phipps, who is really the hype man, sort of the front man almost for Lord Humongous' horde. He's the one that comes out and gives the grand introduction, the Ayatollah of rock and roll.
Right.
Yeah, the guy that decided to try to catch the razor blade boomerang.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. I present Lord Humongous. I got to go back and rewatch that. I haven't seen the original Road Warrior in a while. Let me ask, since we're diverged for just a second, we're playing a little bit in your backyard, and I'm a little jealous because your backyard has a whole lot of action. Did you first get introduced to Mad Max with the American dubbed or the original, Mel Gibson's voice and the original Australian voices? Which version did you first get introduced to with Mad Max?
Well, I didn't watch the original Mad Max until we decided to do Mad Max Minute by Minute. I was raised on Beyond Thunderdome. Yep. And hadn't really ever seen any of the others.
Yep.
Fury Road, we went and saw in the theater, of course. But so when we decided to do Mad Max Minute by Minute, I'm like, okay, well, I guess I better watch it. And Rick, who had seen it before
several times,
he got for me to watch the Australian version.
Right. By the time I started getting into the Mad Max movies in a setting that was not, a weekend broadcast television setting, I was lucky enough to not have to sit through the American dubs. Because we've watched a couple of scenes with them and they are not good.
Oh, it's bad.
It's bad.
No, if you've stumbled across the podcast, you're like, what are you talking about? The original, the one I was raised on, the one I saw, I kept thinking, I know Mel Gibson, and this doesn't sound like Mel Gibson. It sounds weird. Mm-hmm. And all of the voices sounded weird to the point that when I finally got and saw the original dub, because remember, I don't know if you guys talked about this, which is ironic because we'll bring this full circle with Inspector Kemp. The studio said American audiences wouldn't be able to understand what any of these characters were saying if they left the original Australian, dialect in place, and so they overdubbed it. And I don't understand that because it's much better hearing the original character actors talk than it is to have the overdub.
Yeah, I really just don't understand that. Watching the Australian version, I don't have any trouble understanding what they're saying. If they use some kind of slang that I don't understand, then that's fine. I can get the gist of what they mean.
You know, the only character that maybe it's because, you know how sometimes when you hear something for the first time, or maybe you see like the TV version of something, and so that's always the original in your mind. The guy, the voice of the Knight Rider, whoever dubbed the Knight Rider, the opening chase scene in the American release first, I like his voice so much more than the Knight Rider of the original, because it sounds almost now too high pitched. I'm like, wait a minute, you don't sound as manly as you did in the American version, right? Because the American is like, I am the Knight Rider, and now it's like, I'm the Knight Rider. I'm like, wait a minute, that doesn't sound menacing.
Yeah, Vince Gill is an interesting actor. I know of him mainly from being the Knight Rider. But then I saw him in something else, and he played kind of a little Weasley type guy. I'm like, oh, that's not my Knight Rider.
No, it's not. Well, I'm going to use that to bridge back around now to where we leave off here, because we're just about done with minute 51, and we are listening to another character who has a very interesting dialect of his own and does take particular paying attention. Some people get it more than others. My wife is one of those people who, if she hears a really strange accent, she says, can you understand what they're saying? Just accents are really tough for her. And this guy is such an outlandish voice, and we're going to continue to hear from him, because as we end this minute, he's saying we need to pay a little, or I'm going to pay a little. And I'm left with the question, pay a little what? Pay a little less at the drugstore? Pay a little more? What's he paying a little
pay
of?
Homage.
Pay a little respect?
Pay it forward.
We're going to have to find out. Julia, let me ask you first before we wrap up minute 51 here. Anything in this minute that in your notes, or anything that we didn't touch on that you want to bring up?
One thing that I tried really hard to find out about was the painting on the back wall of this hall, and couldn't find anything. I did a Google image search with a screen capture of this painting, and the only returns were for this movie. So I think it's a completely fake painting. And I'm very interested if any of your listeners recognize it as a real, legitimate piece of art.
It actually is. And I think it's called The Children of Charles I.
That's it. Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
But I will tell you this, Julia, I couldn't find out why that's important.
Yeah. And I was the same way. I could not find anything out there that said why that was in there, but it is an actual real painting.
Yeah, it's called The Children of Charles I by Andrew van Dyck, I think a Dutch painter. And it just sits there prominently behind him when, in fact, I thought there has to be, and it could very well be, because it's 44 years, well, coming this December, depending when you're picking up on this podcast, it's coming up on 44 years that this movie was out. I don't know if there was some sort of joke, because he stands directly in front of the painting when he first lets out his first puff of cigar smoke, and that happened last Friday in minute number 50. And I didn't know, I was like, is this because Charles I sent his children to war, or is it because they invented gunpowder? I mean, I couldn't figure out what was going on, but it is very much prominent in the scene, but I couldn't find it. So yeah, Julia, great point. Let's get our valiant listeners out there to chime in, because let's face it, Walt, I already know I don't know everything. My wife reminds me of that all the time. What about you?
Yeah, no, I'm constantly reminded that I know nothing.
Not just that you don't know everything, you absolutely know nothing.
Well, and I dropped art appreciation in college and took music appreciation, which didn't go any better. So, no, we'll definitely have to consult an expert on that.
All right, so listeners, part of our listeners group, if you know why this particular painting, The Children of Charles I, was used behind Inspector Kemp, we'd love for you guys to chime into our Facebook page. Rick, what about you? Anything that we've got to cover on your notes that we didn't already hit?
No, I think we've pretty much covered it all.
Fantastic. Well, you guys are part of the Mad Max Minute. You guys have a fantastic podcast delving into George Miller's mind and his world, and it's a fantastic playground to play in. Where can people learn more about your podcast, and where are you right now?
Our home on the internet is madmaxminute.com. You can find everything essentially there. If you want to subscribe to us, we're on iTunes and Google Play. We also have a Twitter presence at Mad Max Minute and a Facebook presence by searching Mad Max Minute. And we have our own listener group, which is Mad Max Minute Beyond Microphone.
Beyond Microphone. That's awesome. And you guys are in the midst of course, depending when people stumble across this, but by the time you guys are airing here, you are probably a third of the way through Beyond Thunderdome.
Certainly are. We've probably passed beyond what I have referred to in the past as the good part.
All right, I've got to ask. There's been 4 Mad Max movies, and this is always fun because when you start doing these franchises, you're supposed to do them all. Where does Beyond Thunderdome? I'll ask it a different way. How do they rank to you guys?
1, 4, 2. No, yeah, 1, 4, 2, 3.
Okay, so
number 1 is my favorite.
Beyond Thunderdome is your least favorite.
It is, but kind of with a caveat that it doesn't mean I don't like it. I just like the other 3 more.
Yeah, I think I go 2, 4, 1, 3.
Okay.
Because Road Warrior is the purest distillation of the series. Fury Road has so much money behind it that they can afford to do the outlandish stuff. That's where we get the Doof Warrior, after all. The One is Max's backstory that has so much heart. And I can't rightly say that Beyond Thunderdome goes off the rails because there's an extended scene where they are literally on railroad tracks.
Well, yeah, they are.
Right.
The pure goofiness of it does detract from the overall seriousness of the series, though. I'll give it that. But it's no less enjoyable.
Walt, what about you? Because I don't disagree with either one of their 2 lists, and I bet this is one of those things where depending what day of the week that you get asked, you might change out your positions 1 and 2. But Walt, what about you? I know you're a Mad Max fan.
Yeah, I have this bad habit of the first one always being my favorite, and that is not an exception here. I was in 6th grade, I think, when the first one came out, so I saw it maybe a year or 2 later. I kind of have a friend, Rick, like yours. Mine is Tom. We used to go to his house all the time to watch
the movies you weren't allowed to watch at home.
Yes. And this was one of those that we saw probably a couple years after it came out. I'm not sure what format we watched it on, but I just remember taking a breath at the beginning, and I don't think I let that breath out the whole rest of the movie just because it was that good and that exciting. So that movie sets the tone for the rest of them. I was not a huge Thunderdome fan, but the first one really always kind of stands out to me as this is Mad Max, and I compare everything else in that universe to that original.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to weigh in on this one because I do think, I have deviated from originals because I'm the odd man out who thinks Empire is a much better movie than Star Wars. Everybody's like, but you can't have Empire without Star Wars. So Star Wars has to be the best. I'm like, oh, come on. But I think I really do like the first one because it establishes who Max is. But then I jump to number 4 because even though 4 has all of the Hollywood money and effects, there's such a great underlying message and story about women and power and being true to each other, and that you have the ability for redemption that I think a lot of people don't see. They just see a bunch of car crashes. They don't realize how much is happening underneath. And because of that extra layer of complexity, I do like that a little bit more than 2. Then number 2, because of just the sheer fun of watching these guys just go on this adventure. And then a distant number 3. Did I make that point?
So you're saying it's a distant number 3.
Well, he was gonna do a modern version of like Lord of the Flies,
right?
And then somebody goes, "Well, why don't you just set it in the Mad Max world?" So that's where the whole kid thing came from. So
yeah.
Oh, you guys gonna tell? Or am I wrong on that?
You're mostly right.
Mostly right.
Yeah. Terry Hayes wrote Road Warrior with George Miller, and then George Miller and Terry went out to lunch, and they sat down, and Terry Hayes was like, "Hey, I'm writing a story. It's like kind of a Lord of the Flies story." And George Miller was like, "Hey, I bet we could frame that as a Mad Max movie and get a third one churned out because Warner Brothers wants to give me a ton of money."
That's awesome. Well, I don't say that. I was kind of tongue in cheek a little. I love all of the movies. It is definitely the least favorite if I'm going to just pick any of the 4. But I at least admire how George Miller wanted to try to say, if the world's rebuilding, it probably would be cool to focus on where are the kids and kind of use that as a foil to where Tina Turner and her group of nomads have created their own little town in this post-apocalyptic world, and see the difference between kids raising themselves and what do adults do. And I don't know that there's a whole lot of difference between how the adults run their world versus the way the kids do.
I don't want to draw it out too much, but I think Thunderdome is also an excellent example of sticking with a project despite drawbacks, because as we probably have all heard the story, George Miller lost Byron Kennedy, one of his best friends and best partners in the world, during the pre-production of Thunderdome, and he went ahead and made Thunderdome anyway. So it's an excellent monument to his perseverance and an excellent way for a friend and colleague to honor someone who lost their life prematurely. So It always has a twinge of bittersweetness as well when I watch it.
See, look at that. We just turned this into a bit of a Mad Max special edition.
There you go. Nothing wrong with that.
Well,
and I didn't even do a terrible Australian accent.
No. Thank you. Walt, as we wrap up minute 51 here, where can people go to learn a little bit more about Gene Wilder?
Wow, to find out more about Gene Wilder, you probably want to consult with us. We seem to be the experts. I keep getting all these emails with, hey, what about this? What about that? But the best place to find us is www.
Jesus, you don't have to do the www.
You're welcome. HTTP.
Don't stop it. Just stop it.
thewilderride.com, or you can find us on Facebook, find our listeners group there, facebook.com/thewilderride will get you links to everything you need to know about us and a lot of information on Gene Wilder.
And come back tomorrow. Hey, guys, do you mind? I know you're in the middle of looking at, Bartertown and the Wasteland and everything, but do you guys have time to come and chat a little bit more about Gene Wilder and Young Frankenstein?
These days we don't really do the 5-day-a-week thing, but for you, we'll make an exception.
Awesome. Well, we will come back tomorrow then, because we need to come back and find out what is Inspector Kemp going to pay a little something, and we will end with Igor, give someone else a chance, and we'll find out what's that all about. But you got to come back tomorrow for a brand new edition of The Wilder Ride. Humongous!
Well, Frankenstein.
You gotta go Frankenstein.
Okay.